朝は本当にね、新年ばっかり新年食が3年目でございます。
We're very privileged to have the Christianities, I guess, which projects who will be introducing music.
I think you're very lucky that Sir Richard has time to be has time to be tutoring you or whatever he's doing with you, and that the combo, I think, is the thing that really fascinates me. That you had both Richard and Nigel, who are both, of course, AA figures, but also part of the heroic tradition of the AA. I don't know to what extent, I guess all of you really, but to what extent you realise that this event, this summer academy, is the rebirth in some way of a very particular bit of the heroic tradition of the AA. I think that there have been in more recent years other traditions. There has been the graphic tradition, there has been the romantic tradition, there has been the recent tradition of sensitivity, to name but three. But the heroic tradition, which I would make a distinction for, is a slightly raunchier thing, a slightly naughtier thing, a slightly less sweet thing. And I hope Richard won't find me nor the nicer purpose isn't but they represent the really sort of not caring how polite you are tradition of the AA, in the sense that Richard is also, I think, the creator, half of the creation of a very thing that I always regard as the hidden academy of London, that his office and that of another man, knighted also, whose name escapes me for the moment, but between their offices and the looking over the shoulder and sort of the exchange of members of staff over a period of time and other such things that exist between the Rogers office and the Foster office have created in the last 20 years what I call the hidden academy of London, an academy which is the envy of the world, an academy which has produced some extraordinary buildings and is still highly experimental, something which you can hardly ever say of offices that are so well grounded and so well established, so that we have this extraordinary situation of the academy, your academy, grafted onto or into the existing 50-year-old brilliant academy, with this other academy sitting out there doing building. And what intrigues me is this curious, fascinating combination of the raunchy tradition coming into the science of the building academy of London, which exists in these special offices, where the intensity of discussion and the viciousness of the wit is equal to any teaching academy, I would say. That makes it very special. I think you can find other cities in the world where there is a very good office that does lovely stuff, but it's very difficult to find another comparable office in the same city, so that there's a sort of air of self-satisfaction. Goes right on the country, for example, Frank Gehry's office in Santa Monica. It is difficult to think of another office in the same city, where he is really, really challenged. I throw that out. And I think that therefore he is going to talk in a sort of workshop sense. He tells me, I'll believe it when I've seen it, that he hasn't really prepared this lecture. It is really a working lecture about cities by somebody who builds cities. Very unusual phenomenon. Issue for a sweaty slide right at the beginning of the lecture. Richard.
Thank you very much. How much I read it to start the lecture after being introduced? I was going, I just go on. Great. I also want to say welcome to you, Alan. First time I met you, and I'm very interested in taking this on. Apparently, these two people are playing on front of the two hot seats. Lambda, next building, the two hot seats in London. I think Alan and Peter. The two teaching posts. I'm going to talk very informally about cities, and as a sort of continuation of those of you who were there to the sort of talk we had at the summer school on a couple of days ago. And if anybody wants to interrupt, they're welcome, and questions, etc., are welcome at any time. I'll shoot straight off. Let's have 2 slides.
No.
All of these slides are moderately ad hoc. This is really about cities in terms of the fact that what they offer is meeting places like this. It is the real heart of the city. What it is about is exactly what we're doing. It's about meeting, it's about exchange of ideas, all things that might be different to do between less impressed places like this and the crisis which we are facing is urban crisis in terms of the erosion of exactly that kind of space, the meeting spaces. You can do all sorts of activities, all the other activities outside. You can go to the villa, you can go to university, you can go to, you can have some housing estates outside cities, but what you don't have is the density which creates this form of exchange of ideas, exchange of pleasure, an exchange of culture. It is this erosion in the city which I am primarily concerned with in most of our work. This is the slide that we were about to start with on the East Economic Plan. And the use that I want to make out of it is that, the amount of white area, which is basically public area, is probably nearly this piece of the slide is probably 50%. It's churches, it's piazzas, it's markets, it's squares, it's campos, and so on. All these are actually public domain, and of course in those days there would be no shops. So the black area, all the shops are very small. The black area also should be seen parking. All this was really public domain. And in London, which is another, which was a great human city. People like my family came here in the 30s. Partly because of that humanism. Human really was this vision of great green parks, amazing sward. There's amazing parks in the world out here. St. James Park, Green Park, Hyde Park, and so on. Green Park. Great parks, great squares, and Nash Golden Mile, or miles, the cubits London, great gardens, trees, and so on. Very much a public domain city. So that was the civilizing effect, if you like. It was certainly much more a softer city than most of these continental cities, other than the amount of rain we got. But there was also so much the sort of planning and sort of life that went on there. And it had these great central nodes, which everybody in the civilized world knew about. Everybody knew about this where it was the center of the empire, as some recall it. And that Sloane Square or Harlem, Westminster, or Oxford Circus, or Marble Arch, or Hyde Park Corner, Hyde Park Corner, Marble Arch, were always the places where people talk freedom of speech. That's most of their foreigners in there, something national. Those were these were really ending, certainly in the 50 years ago, that big period of freedom that we could go to our life. And what these circles are those nodal points. They are the squares and Oxford circles and so on. These nodal points were, one would assume, those great names would be the meeting places of the public. And what we've managed to do in the last 50 years actually is not making meeting places, we've made more roundabouts. Which is an interesting thing. I've always talked about the effects of social consciousness, of people's places, public domain, and so on. And there isn't a great reason for this, apart from a whole lot of traffic. But then if you go to New York, there aren't any roundabouts, so obviously you don't have to have roundabouts. So there is a choice, we make choices. I'll come to it later, but we're now working on central planning for Berlin. We can only allow 10% traffic in Berlin. There is about 20% traffic in the city of London. You can control the traffic, do all sorts of things if you do all powers there. So now what we're now seeing is an erosion. First of all by the vehicle, and secondly by the market forces which produce primarily office buildings, so that London is now being what has been built in the last 20 years of London is basically lost since 73 is primarily offices. And offices are not public buildings. In a sense they're in a single entrance to them, and they have to be carefully placed if they're not going to break up the continuity of public domain. In other words, if you say on Wall Street or Google Street or whatever it is, it's a public thoroughfare, and that those streets are primarily shops, restaurants, etc. along the road, then obviously when you start to plunk in, drop into those places, what I call private buildings, you disrupt the continuity of the city as a public space. It's interesting if all spaces are public, which are private. There's lots of housing areas, the city of London is basically what I call private domain and so on. But we're seeing a continuous erosion of public domain by private interests, by the fact that really money is the market forces are the ones which are planning. There isn't we're no longer talking about planning, but we have good market forces telling us where what the building should be there, and then the architect is left the choice of which decoration to put in the face of that building. That's no longer in a position of planning and this just shows again Capitol in Rome, Michelangelo farm, and it used to be the crown of Michelangelo, with linking the historic Roman Rome of the 2,000 years ago at the back, and the modern Rome of the last 1,000 years or more in front, and this sort of these three farmhouses, and its conversion into a public space, public domain, the shift, this gentle shift. Normally it's still there, but there's suddenly becoming this great piazza, this heavenly piazza, which looks out in all direction over the last 2,500 years of history, and the whole thing is swelling around this wonderful horse place. It's a Christian horse, and carefully removed in case it gets damaged, so that it can get back in there. But it is really a look at points, amazing direction. It seems to be the primary role of the architect is to create spaces and places. This is certainly one of the things that is very special. So that's it. Oh man, I can't see many slides. Right, Trafalgar Square. We did a project which called London as it could be. That was based on a slightly earlier project, which was the extension of the National Gallery, which Yale University is seen by now in Victoria. The competition was this piece of land, which was a cast on, and I took part in the competition, which was a little bit competition. It was not, it was a developer competition where the developer had build offices, and then let the top floor turn it into a museum. That's its position, and what is interesting, as this slide shows, and this one also shows, the position of the site here, on this slide, is that it is actually one end of the National Gallery, and at the other end, one good building underlines that there is only one good building in the square. One good building, it's a market includes that great spire, there's blocks of closes off space which looks out in every direction of the square. It's very big. It's too comfortable square, but it has some features of great views out, especially down Whitehall and spires and domes and murets of Whitehall. In that direction over there. So it's Scotland and the other. So another Scotland and the other around here, which gives the possibility of great views if this was on the road. And what we decided to do was to try at this extension of the gallery, not just to produce a pretty building, to try to produce a pretty building, but to look at the urban implications. This is the key. And say, well, here's Leicester Square, Rugby Square. And right next to Leicester Square is Piccadilly Circus, and there is and there's Trafalgar Square. They're all within 300 or 400 meters of each other. Could you actually create an urban link between these three great spaces and make this route get a pedestrian route, and then simply because it's all going downhill, so it's rather nice about it going downhill here. With steps and so on, sinking below ground and arrive at Trafalgar Square, because one of the problems with Trafalgar Square is not only is it impossible to get to because of the traffic, but when you do get there, there's nothing to do but feed the pigeons. So maybe you link it and start to create a place, and maybe you can have this stuck in under here, there's a drop there, you can see it down here, and start to make this a place. Later on we suggested we should close this, maybe, or we should close it to a condition of being more if we actually recommend closing the street. And create this as a great platform, public platform, with view out towards London. Next slide. Can I go back on this one? Sorry. One thing I wanted to say is that if you look at, we've got the National Gallery that was bad, it's just a mediocre. It changes its mind continuously, and it means something. From the point of view I mean, I think you have to be careful how you set your own slightly ahead of being good. It has this effect as it were. I think it's actually 17 times it changes its mind as you go around here. It's just maybe its mind like this. That's probably the most interesting part. But then it's dominated by this amazing little pivot way out of scale it is. Either the idea that the money ran out. And this is as it clearly closes this end. Can we change this? Right. And so what we suggested dimension was, okay, this is already semi-pedestrianised, or sort of pedestrianised, pedestrianisation, go down steps, create a galleria, partly the ground that you'd like to look along here, and put shops, and extension of the National Gallery within this. And once you did this, we suddenly found we didn't have to have offices here as was in the brief, consultant said if you would pass by here, there's going to be shops below the museum, which is a much better idea. And you start to get this place livened by gallery shops and cafes and stuff, and volumes of people moving through towards the central point. Also, if you look at this, not only is this space exactly the same relation as this facade, and this, and that spire is actually at the same position as that. But the centre of that's actually a third sort of triangle, which helps you to start to form the building. There was a relation between that and Kevin Plot over here, sorry, and a tower we're about to see over here. This is really a link through from Leicester Square, and one could say quickly about seeing is really try to show our approach as wide as possible and start with Leicester Square and sort of going downhill and down the squares. Next, the gallery on top. And here you just see what we did. And this is our extension of the gallery on top of the building was here, and the big the tower, which is about the same height as the spire, looking on the religious spire, instead of the bar, viewing space, and basically it says the view from here is really as good as most many great paintings. So inside the gallery you have great paintings, the shops below, and up above you go and have a drink. And we had all the usual outcries and so on. People said, well, there's no relationship between this and the rest, and then quite well, kind of made part of the relationship. There is a relationship that says that this is more, this is the central point of the National Gallery, and this tries to give us a point, a force, tries to make this more recognizable as a sort of negative force people that third down on this, in this point of this, and that it does try to recognize in mass the more formal elements of history without copying the pieces, which for me is the cop-out. So we try to use our own forms, our own type of architecture, and there's all the usual cries about why you call it an oil rig, not a square, and so on. And what about why should we copy it, or as they do in Turing, why shouldn't the system just dribble down the road? And my own view on some of this point is that the whole thing about this classical building is that these things actually mark elements. That those two columns mark the end of the building. Those two columns mark that end. This marks the center. It's a very formal building. I can't imagine that anyone thought about extending this building even more the informal way down the road. Anyhow, certainly not historically correct. Though there is a certain interest in the point of the Uffizi slide here, Texas and Urea, is that the real history of the Bahamas, built over different periods, reflects those periods, whether it's medieval buildings, whether it is the wonderful Uffizi of the Sari, who created this false perspective on the argument, linking the argument, one public domain, a great square here, aiming the Uffizi on this tower, as I can say in here. This false perspective back in all that. So you have the 10th, 11th century, the 16th century, the 12th, 13th century, and the medieval period, and you would call it a harmonious square. It seems to me that there's harmony that comes out of this. Yes, this was the Renaissance part, the late Renaissance part, Michelangelo and Sari part here. Sorry, Renaissance form of Michelangelo. There is an interrelation in the forms, the scale, the grain. We're talking about pieces. Except when Vasari came to repairing pieces of the building, we had to extend it physically how the building was presented to be actually correct. We studied the part how to create this repair job in that facade. This is the oil rig extension. And I really can't carry out certain relationships, like I said, there is a sort of line through here, and keep building low because that's the general massing of the piazza. And this was the bar, the restaurant, the meeting places, and so on. And this was the shops and offices down here, and this was the gallery, suspended the portal space that became a gateway to part of the square, which became just a square through the space, a big gateway, with north lights and single span. And we said there are different times in this building would have different light and different length of light for this, so this building is separated, so if we demolish this when the more intelligent government came along, this issue would all be a museum, or it would physically remove this and extend it and so on. And this is a view on the side, again trying to show the tower and the importance of this tower in relation to the centre of the square, Nelson's column, and to the entrance of National Galleries and Markers of the field. Next. This is sort of, that looks like this images of how to take this view. And this is sort of the pathetic end of the man. Where it actually says that there's lines about keeping alive. And, but everything else is gone. I mean, who wants the life? And the fact of last thing about it, so the thing is really bad life is on the side of the fence, this was something really fabulous. And where you would expect it great, this is a money there, but it's a great wonderful river. And where you expect a big public domain there, you actually have nothing. All the toilet papers every night. And then change the sort of grain. But finally, it really is nothing. And it is very boring. and there's architectural art, which has an architectural art, it is the worst in my case. And I just put this because I think this is the best. Here's some markers, and again back towards the prestige, towards the markers that get in. And positively, we can be conscious that one could fit in less than this. We just find a building here that looks like another building. I mean, there is no building, everything is different. And that's that great Byzantine beautiful palace with some mosaic, as well quite facade, up there with Hollywood's Anchor. There's that wonderful library. White classical or something happening in the library. The absolutely crazy zany domes of the Venice San Marco, which is as bad as you can get. And then on top of all this, that wonderful square side, classical British side, isn't it? And in the middle of all this, there's something developed in the century. There's a tower. The tower's made of brick, from another brick anyway. There's a tower made of brick with a green tower roof. Imagine you can do that. And that's what the whole space occurs around. The point I'm making is conscious. The visions are actually wonderfully interrelated. And it's about a million different styles, a million different approaches. And about third range, they have light, they have matte, and a certain number of uniformity. Continuing this sort of project that which the way the National Gallery section this exhibition called London as it could be, and it started with trying to find a bit where we could weave a bit of London together, and we chose London on two axes, which is the two axes we chose, which I hope I know, one north-south, one east-west. The centre of the centre is that actually is probably used to go apart. The bridge, which is a suspension bridge, is what we kind of used in contrast to the country. And this was going to be the museum tomorrow, cafes, restaurants, pedestrian bridge, and the railway in London. It's going to be a station railway and so on between Westminster on one side. Now you see it more clearly that what we suggested was a new link between Trafalgar Square, which is here, now you see this area here, across Hungerford Bridge to the South Bank, and also linking through to Leicester Square and the National Gallery extension as well. So we're continuing with that project, the demolition of this railway station, and the idea that the railway, there's no reason why this railway station should go here, and there's already a massive Waterloo station on this side, here, and all the trains should stop at Waterloo East, and there should be a tramway or a double tramway or triple, or just zoom back and forth from Waterloo. This is the sketch for that sort of trainway and the walkway to the pedestrian bridge, and then islands in the water. So that was this axis here, with this removal of this bridge. And people are always saying, well, the reason that nobody walks backwards and forwards across the Thames, I like to say, the Arab or whatever, is because it's so much wider, and so we said, well, it's so much wider, we're going to put some islands in. So these are islands in the water, islands or moorings or whatever it is, this pedestrian bridge, to the islands of stepping stones. Also, one of the strange things about London is the bridges don't actually start with banks, they often start as half a mile back this way, half a mile back this way, therefore making them walk twice as long as we walk across the river. And if you look at these things, it's interesting. People say, of course, that's what people cost. It is what it means, like it's made more difficult. Also, along the embankment, which is the other study, there's actually nothing to do apart from the occasional secondary pub, certain pub. But there is a potential, that fantastic south-facing park. You see the tree outside Shellnecks, outside Savoy, down to Whitehall, past the great Gothic building over there and so on. Here you actually have a park, but no one uses it. It's all cut up by roads, and the greatest part of all is the river, which is really the key to the heart of London. one of the themes which they're trying to develop is, you know, how do you open up London to the river? How do you open up London to the greatest public meeting spaces, great wet green park, this great wet water park here, all the way through here. I think we turn the direction, so instead of buildings looking back onto the river, as they do, over the river, away from the river, and back on it, how do you start making it onto the river and make this the real heart? Everything is in one part, if you think of the 18th and 19th century, the public consciousness of the 19th century, and compare it with the lack of public consciousness and the daring, especially the 18th century, and also the 19th century, you know, it's quite stunning what they did. Next, so these are the two axes. You can see the ones here. One axis, as I mentioned, basically goes from Leicester Square all the way down to Waterloo Station and in that direction. The other axis being sinking the road below the embankment and creating a great south-facing view, linear path facing onto the river. Removing the bridge there. This is after we've removed the road, possibility of having an embankment as a park, a linear park, replacement of the bridge, the islands, from the river, the regaining of London. Here's also the railway tracks, and how they did full of the Southland Road. Removal of those railway tracks, the extension of the public domain there, the possibility of building new buildings in some areas, especially where Charing Cross Station is. Next. Jumping around with the closure and one Alpha Public, here we close Carmel East. As I said, you can't get from here's Trafalgar Square, you can't get from Trafalgar Square from the natural barrier, from the footpaths around, from the pavements around, you can't get to Trafalgar Square, it's all full of traffic, and instead of close it, create a new piazza, and it's tightened to its higher level, it's smaller. We try to create a sort of a piazza that looks out across the Whitehall area of London, by stopping that traffic and forming a small roundabout basically in the march of St James's Park. Next. And here's this great building, Somerset House, London building, which is water lapping through here, the arches, and you can come here by boat. Now cut off about a third of the way along up the building. On the side, it is unusual, the centre of the and the embankment. Close, put the road into a tunnel, and you start to get, in fact, exactly what people used to do. This is how it was originally designed, in other words, the water through the arches. And you get Somerset House back with its terraces, its restaurants, its meeting places, its theatres, maybe up here and down here. And now that we have a flood control system by Docklands and you actually can start with steps down the corner and so on. So you retrieve in a way, you retrieve that public domain by one very heavy shift, really basically shifting one road below ground, which are before in forefather, before classified in terms of underground and so on. Next. That one is excellent point. You know, this is always one of the trees, nobody actually in this area, can't get across there or cars and everything else, can't use the embankment, can't get the feeling of light. The possibility that if you close that road, you start to create spaces and places. Next. Yes, that's quite simple. One of arguably the world's most deepest footpath. Every time I'm training, which goes every 2 seconds across the river, you feel like the whole thing vibrates, and you feel like you're going to be thrown into the river. Usually as a musician who's playing somewhere down here. Between trains, and watching trains. And this has been argued for right about 100 years ago. Somebody on the website to say, this is the people's agreement to perish, but beyond. So for 100 years we've been discussing what a perish is beyond. It is. Right, next. Originally it was a great bridge. Later, by Brunel, by the way, it's a great pedestrian. Interesting, as you go through the strip books, you find things we didn't have before. This was a Victorian architect who actually put the island exactly where we put the island, all the way down here, And that's something with Victoria's Star, created a new bill, that's actually opened on the bridge, and so on. So there's water, so we've been talking about it for a long time. Our own sketch. it's in that organised document. One of them is something. It isn't London. It's London. Never built London. One of those. And the point being made is what we're talking about. This is one of the earlier sketches looking at the possibility of stretching out and replacing Hungerford Bridge by a new pedestrian bridge over the islands and so on. Next. Jumping around, this is how it used to be. Somerset House with the water landing turret and so on. It's a great sort of view of what London has in the early 19th century. The Belfry, that one sort of stepping the view out of the court and the spires and domes and so on. And the skyline of London. What temperature is in our hands to do something with it? Next. Then we know Great Bridge. If you actually look carefully, you'll see it always says public clears, and that's what I know in Leicester. It's soon to be Leicester when the British House changes the decoration of the outside. And the possibility of the bridge, pedestrian bridge, the bullet train, the tram, and so on. What's again intriguing is the bridges in London are 70 runners, and one of the suspension and now that goes to the worst ones. Next, some more shots of the models that trying to create a place out of massive work. Next. The skylines, the religion of the skyline. In fact, in a sense, there wasn't a difference between medieval form, which are continuous and massive, and the singleness of the Renaissance building, which is standing in space, very much more like their own modern buildings. And saints are the place. A rather unfinished project here, it's all a competition project. We were invited to take place in a competition in the area behind the St. Paul's called Paternoster, now being designed by Prince Charles. Solid form building, and so on, creating a big piazza outside the access of the church, and saying, well, the public domain is the roof area, you can't go above it, so we created a new public world on the roof there, all the public clubs, fitness clubs, or whatever else it was, so we really level the new public domain also shows massive bumping of the dirt, trying to get level, same level as that, one public domain, and another half of the first place. We try to get this sort of, not buildings standing in space as the early moderns or the Renaissance did, but really this heavy or medieval pattern in the dense pattern of buildings. That's a key part of this, was the idea of because the amount of office space we had to put here was to get the public domain A on the roof and B not only at ground level, so the whole ground level, the whole ground story was public domain, but also below ground, so we created this piazza which sunk down to the tube. And actually when we drove there when the tube, when the underground was here, we actually had a view of St. Paul's, so the underground came through, the view of them on the underground again to this through the new piazza. Next. Our own offices as they were. And again, if I might make this by sort of a small shift, public area, restaurants, and so on, around the green area, our own offices here, we finish up there. And try to create a community in this area of housing and so on. It's really about a shift. We really just removed most, apart from the housing and the roofing station, what we do is just remove the rubbish. Next. The same, our offices again. Next. Competition. Paris, and again the whole idea of in Paris where it's up there, the ways that people become recognized, especially youth, with I raise just a little program of competitions. I don't like to words on this, but I think it's worth it in the sense that for those who think that the basic basis in the system. In France, they're probably the most sophisticated competition system around. It starts at university where people whose pieces are given a prize are then published by the government and sent around to all the mayors. And also all the young architects who have come through one competition but didn't build them. These are also published by the government. They're sent around to different mayors and the town halls. The concept is that they will be used a new extension of the government, received the students on the students. So the competition starts at a very on a simple level, but we start with good. And this competition then will do the whole hierarchy right to the national competitions and the massive advanced type competition, for example, popular competitions. And so a new generation is coming. 1970 will be again one who's on a public competition, remember? Which in a sense was very much an expression of the system. As we saw it, and what people were being told by the Trump today, not only by French architects, but French architecture, 40s, 50s, and 60s, but without much Christian worse than Europe. I would now argue that all the French architects after the younger generation, the 80s, are as good as anyone in Europe. And what I'm making by creating a framework of opportunity for you, we're actually seeing results. This was just as a bridge across the Seine, a gateway bridge between Gare d'Orsay and north and south. Basically, it was a single loop, things in the arch, wires going down here. It actually refers in two directions. In other words, it's actually refocused into the straight. And the idea was that not only would you see it as a gateway between the two sides, but also you get a zoom as you pass through these very clear fields and see all that sense of next. And this one was because her father, who was also in that competition, who I think was one of the great engineers, was asked to do a design for the East River Crossing in London. This is actually what's going to be built, which is really special. And they're both exactly the same. There's one being built like the Liverpool sky to Scotland, the island of Skye, and the one being built. And both of them. And the point I'm going to make is, God knows why how can we gone there? So which were the British. Why could we build this? And the answer is it was 2% more expensive than that. And that's where we're reflection. Next. Again, it's a view of Britain, we like a view of France. And I see these things in books like not because what I want to say is that province, the best architecture, some of the best artists, theatre and so on, does go on in it, it's just not recognized. But when IMK came doing the extension of Ventura then in Later 1 of the National Gallery, the National Gallery is the Gallery, it's the same space that we showed you before. When IMK came doing this, he created this baronial bank on the idea that this was more fitting for the British culture and what to do when the same man decided French potatoes, and he created this. An interesting image of it. Next. A project on the Argonne. We were asked to develop or to look at the possibilities of doing conservation study on part of Florence in the Argonne, rather like in now being extended. And this is the Argonne from the 18th century print. Showing its use, people using it, steps going down and so on. And today it's sort of what's left of those steps over here, and it's misuse, if you like, and the possibility of creating something down here all the way along the banks. Is what we're in next. This is the sort of little drawing. What we suggest is really, again, a linear walk, a top, and walk all the way along. This is the old historic, the Roman Florence, early Florence, square grid, and this is the side of Florence. And the idea was that you could start to examine and walk along the bank, along the bank, the muddy side, which you can see in some of the slides that we saw before, and also created this linear paths, creating activity places, nodal points, interchanges with traffic, with metro, with buses, with markets and so on, points to create these changes and try and develop a new route through the centre of Florence, and which you could actually have new, and also have views. So suddenly you have views of the Uffizi and so on, of completely different levels. So you look up and the cost, you really walk along these places here, steps and so on. Next. And so you have sort of plug-on elements. The Argonne rises, and for about something like 20 days maximum per year, actually goes above the screw steps, so long as so what, that can be washed over the top. And these elements, the floating pieces and so on, the barges, and could be moved away. We later also developed a bridge, a simple bridge, which I have the sides of. We also linked the north side of the island bridge, by a semi-magnetic bridge, which when water rushed down the mountain would sink down the bottom. And that was again intended to retrieve or make use of public domain which no longer used along the edges of the Argonne, and winding with the monuments and so on of Florence. Still with Florence, we were asked by Fiat, together with 7 or 8 other architects, to look at a large piece of land which they were using as a cargo, about 2 miles from the centre of Florence. And it was a very strange experience. So about 8 architects, half of Italian national name and half international names. And we sort of all held hands and just sort of master plan together, which intriguing in a sense. And what the key part was we said, okay, there'll be a great park in the centre, all buildings must either touch each other or overlap. We don't care what style we build it in. And some very simple places, not really mind about heights, but there had to be gateways, water and so on within it. So it was a very simplistic idea. Our own gateway, we had a site, yes, that we had an entrance on this side from Florence, which is out here. We created a gateway through there, and this was sort of a gateway. This was they had asked us to do opposite, which is that, shopping centre, which is this, and this sort of gateway into the centre of that building. Unfortunately, as we projects got us, and that was changed just as we were trying to get planning permission, so we're dead. So next. Boats on the Pompidou. Again, it's rooted in sort of the loops, I suppose, is what I was saying. When we looked at this area, back in 1971, the thing that came out was that this part was unbelievably dense. It was very run down in those days. It narrowed it really in slum. And that the only open space they was built in, of course, very nice in those days. And the only space was really this area, which car park in the 1930. Buildings had been demolished in the 1930 because this was the brothel and pimping area of Paris, and the idea was to get rid of the problem of what property and buildings and commercial buildings. That worked. The prostitution one very bad, being more flexible. But the space was left as a car park. So I wish it. Actually, Les Arbors this last year was a rather wonderful. The sort of exhibition area is used by the police for training policemen to drive around tight corners. Things like that. It was quite a long way for a while. It's a very sad story. Anyhow, this was the open. Somebody said, okay, we will try to create great public piazza, a place for all people. I think it was core started with this will be a place for all people, all ladies, all kids, cars, etc. It will be crossed between a computerized British museum and a culture-oriented Times Square, something like that. Times Square is the the idea being it was a people's place which actually had a certain set of information, first and foremost, that can really people's place. So we created a big piazza, and the piazza covered the whole site, apart from where the buildings were actually the piazza underneath the building. So this was a big open space instead of a nice piazza. People would come and come here. The big battle here actually was to close the roads, in which we did succeed. On the piazza side, Rue Saint-Jacques, the old Roman road of Paris, wasn't closed. It was pedestrianised. So that we have pedestrian side and the car side. But really it was the public domain which gave the form, the building, and the idea of opinion streets and all that sort of place. So this was the street side, which was hard-edged element on the street. The building was put right back on the street, continued the line, and to create a sort of barrier between the cars and so on. This is the people's side of the other side, and you can see that's the people's side here, the continuation of the arched facade, and below the public building on one third of the whole facade, and the communication from the building to the people was going to be very speed, which never happened because the last time we started, we said he was going to control the screen, the audience of the screen, he was going to go left wing or right wing, and he said, no, it's going to be culture. Politics sort of lost the match. Anyhow, so this is what we're doing. On the other hand, keyboard is active. Basically, go really a lot of them go to time and then go in the space and watch them. And people watching people activities. Next thing. Building people and streets and so on. I won't go through that. It's structure. Next. Marla Ballet, we won a competition. This is one of the towns here, Marla Ballet, for the town centre. There was a possibility of using water and so on. Basically, what we did was create the lake and put a bridge over the lake in which the commercial area goes on this bridge, and then the cultural activities is a simple brown big park. Next. Example Provence, another of these competitions. The last one we did was about last. Aix is interesting in the sense that there is a wonderful medieval quarter. You see the pattern of medieval streets are very dense Mediterranean medievalism in this area. The 19th century is also quite interesting with its garden and this with lots of light and more light going into it, the sewage, etc. in this area here. And then the sad 20th century what's left, the mess over here. One of the most wonderful streets in the world, full of quite 4 lines of trees all the way down the centre of the main walking street, we say, and it's like 3 buildings. this small square. The competition was a development of this area here. Nearly everybody in the community, I don't really want to say everybody, apart from John Newell and ourselves, continued this great avenue of trees all through there. We felt that the late 20th century wasn't the same as the 500 years ago when this was developed. And we couldn't formalize how the future would be. So we created really on the same axis of the great avenue here, roundabout from the people's place here. And we created really three squares. One was a square with hotels, and offices, cultural centre around here, and this square here is around. Another one was linked all the transportation, train, buses, parking, underground system that we developed here, which was packaging, and now it was housing on a small river we created with the canal, all the way through here with some winter garden over here. So really there were three nodal points, and instead of having a continuation of the tree-lined avenue, we started a series of spaces which there was a way of walking to be able to see this, but the walking was centered throughout. Next. Part of this, here's some photographs of it, part of the idea was that structures were pretty popular this year, which created text and so on, you swing out of the main spire, the anchor stone, if you like, of the scheme with the hotels, and obviously the apartments on the principal square, in order to the transportation square and the houses. Scale was not, it was very much essential to scale as to this, but it was broken down into a number of measurable elements. Strasbourg, where we found out three competitions, building one of them. The competition for the old area of Strasbourg. Strasbourg is this amazingly sort of it's French, but it's called German. Town full of rather, to me, rather sweet and soft. That's what they call Elizabethan type buildings. I have some company with this sort of nice looking sort of thing. But it has got but it has got skylines, it doesn't have some great stone of the cathedral in the centre, which gives a lot of peace and abstract. And an amazing bridge, which is an earth, which is a bridge where you walk at one ground level with an earth mound level over the top of it. Here. We were asked for housing and museum. And this is actually the museum, as the earth bridge here through to museum, piazza, housing, and so on. That's possible to describe as a lecture. Anything I need to say here, I'd like to finish housing. Unfortunately, not English, but anyhow, when I went to see them, I met the mayor for starting the competition. I said, Mr. Mayor, shout out to people like I'm going to look and see I'm not going to be able to see my buildings, I'm going to put the old prison's going to be the museum, and the shopman's going to go to the bridge, and I promise you won't see any modern architecture at all, and all the usual lines I have to be doing in this country. And the mayor turned around to me and said, "Mr. Roberts, if we wanted that architecture, we wouldn't have invited you." Actually, I'd forgotten. It's a sort of, after a while, you react to the being beaten. So I won't go through this in detail. Next. Let's continue the same discussion. That was actually a very good issue. We'll have a roof there and through the same. Next, the competition is not so lengthy. The wonderful old cathedral of Strasbourg over here, and they wanted to create a new extension of Strasbourg with a lot of offices and shopping. This across this canal. Strasbourg is full of canals and rivers, and the idea was to create a rising, with thousands of cars, so we put cars into a hill and create a hill on the top level of the shopping system, arcade at the top, and you walk upwards to a international centre which links through to the main street. So this is really kind of opposite of two lines and the shopping in Piazza. Next. Models of that. The shopping level to the market level, directly 2 levels of shopping. You came up steps all the time, all the way up to the top. So you climb steps to climb to the next. Building which we're just about to commence inside, which is the Human Rights Courts described as a petition, which follows the rather pretty curve of the river, form of the building, divided into 2 parts. One is the courts. These are the courts for 26 countries which signed a pact of the original pact was 1920, so it's not in the EC, it's more than the EC, and they get all forms of human rights cases. So these are the courts, 1, 2, and the third one up there. There's a people group and then their officers down here stepping down towards the river. In a way, symbolism is probably more important here than the rest of the work on the public. Yes, this is a very it's a green building and it's a very much softer building. There are these drums next. The drums, the wings which step down into the water and find the oil and in some ways very slightly back on the river. Next. Berlin. I'm not going to lie, I'm going to say everything. What I'm going to say is just again a few points about it, which I find interesting. First of all, West Berlin is one of the greenest cities I've ever seen. It's amazing streets, and it's still among the life. East Berlin is a more disastrous situation. And then there is this celebration of the memory of Berlin. And obviously Berlin is an important town, city, and the area of West Berlin is really part of the square area of Berlin. Potsdamer, Leipziger Platz, which is this area right in the center of Berlin. There's a great clear garden over here. And which is really the Roman wall, which is not quite very sure all this. Then we're studying this. We have clients. We have 5 major industrialists, quite say German, but one is solid. Very headquartered, European headquarters of general sense, some Canadians and others. And we have this strange situation where we're appointed by the industrialist side of private, rather than by the city, where we're trying to sort of find a way between the public demand, the public domain, and the private needs of the landowners in this area. And on top of that, there's the whole question of what the city used to be, what I'm saying about memory. What is totally clear, and which surprises me, is the need to totally forget where the wall was. I mean, there was this amazing gap in the middle of the city, this massive city, this gap, which is not just the width of the wall, but which areas like this would be half a mile thick, because trains and everything which just suddenly stopped and pulled back again. And so you really had areas of immense importance and density and much narrower. And one's tendency would be, my mindfulness certainly was to say, well, we must make use of this area where the wall went through, and terrible things happened. Now you've got it there. There is this space of constant line of trees, bicycle park, highway, whatever it is, a river, and so on. But actually, the whole tendency by everyone, I mean, in Germans, that they want to forget the war. They want to recreate, in a sense, partly a memory of the 1930s, where at that time, that was Leipziger Platz, Potsdamer Platz. The Potsdamer Platz was the busiest center in Europe. Cars and horses and so on, and through this area here, 20s and 30s. The area and this need to recreate some of these accents, some of these actual elements which actually are now conservation areas. So you've got a fixed element here, color roads are actually fixed. Leipziger Platz. And you've got a situation where it's very difficult to cross with east and west. So everybody's saying, okay, we'll cut all the traffic through here. And we're saying, well, this is going to be once more the hub of Germany. We pass Berlin, probably the name of Germany, arguably of Europe, certainly also Eastern Germany is the capital before Eastern Europe. Then either there's a traffic interchange or a people's place, which are common both. And it's sort of diagram saying what happens obviously in the industrial bottom of the road sure isn't a people's place, it's a traffic place. There's just a very small one, 30 agents, which mark as a one flat iron buildings, flat iron church and don't. But that's a car space, and Siena says the people's place in this country doesn't go through levels like here, so it examines 12 clearly traffic space, so the traffic, and so on. And you see this one, that's land on primary traffic. I mean, it's interesting because that's the closest that's traffic going through it. Anyhow, as it happens, we have been told that there's just not enough scrap that even all this is totally dashed off. Fortunately, we've got enough original cars, so we've got problems all the way. Even quite big countries go from the roads and service and so we're now discussing the traffic movement. The good, the interesting part to me is, first of all, the traffic I mentioned earlier. The Berlin authorities are more or less decided that they will only allow 9% of all people in central Berlin to move by public transport. That is a very interesting situation. There are cities where there are 75%. And that here are, historically, there are already 5 levels actually there's 4 levels of public transport, including the PTV, Fox Train, and they are all stopped in the same. This is amazingly well paid public transport. That's the idea I'm saying, is an analysis of green spaces, public spaces, public transport systems, and private needs, and that's really kind of position next. Photographs of this amazing here as it was, if you like, and how they, in one sense, how they'd like it. Well, one part of it, there was some plans of like this back in sort of 36 replacement of Leipziger Platz. This is how it is now. You see the data on the ground. This is on fixed, and that's just showing over there. But of course, at the same time, they also want about 2 times the density, which there's times. So 2 times, therefore, 2 times the density. Same discussion. Yes, where the wall used to go through, there's the site. And the point is amazing. You really are building a desert. And in some sense, there is no infrastructure. Because it's no longer there. So we're rebuilding this wall. In fact, that's statistically. Just the Senate, I think, this time, we're rebuilding the wall so that the tourists can come to see it and pay their money. See it, but that's another discussion. We have this interesting memory of life. And what is this? What is this space? Next. So it's a positive memory. Baltimore was one of the most run-down cities. I remember in the 60s, it really was the critical city that was very close to Washington. The whole black-white situation was flaring up in the 60s. It has become a very elegant, slightly slowly port area now, with a number of museums. Not quite like Frankfurt, which managed to build 30 museums in 70 years. But where there is, well, it's a lot of wonderful marine museum and so on. And we're working on this area here to create biology, marine biology laboratories and exhibition area. And sort of looking at sort of how else we can create a people movement system around it, which is a port. There's a building in a way sort of these are laboratory labs down here, and it's sort of public domain on the moon, so that like Berkeley, we've got public domain finally on the start here, but we're inside the roof, inside the laboratories. And the labs and exhibition on that. Next. Lloyd's, which again, here you're back to this thing of time of an irregular medieval site. And the difficulty certainly of technological especially where cars and so on come to technologies installed to create irregular buildings. So here you have the irregular site is taken up by a regular simple rectangle with great atrium or insurance and sector, and the spare space is used by these vertical towers served there and served there, creating a series of layers so that the eye is led from piece to piece across this building, and into these spaces in position for one side of floors, cafes and restaurants, and public ground area is basically public domain, which is really probably the greatest building. And in fact, it obviously buildings in this type of site have to be designed as pieces. You never see the facade. And therefore it's designed to see narrow streets and so on, so that the functional element of relation between the short life servant area, because the comments, toilets, and wherever else will actually change air conditioning and so on, depending on density of people and usage and so on, whereas the warehouse got that long life, but also that gives you an interrelation, a dialogue between the solid part and the more temporary part, which allows you again to play with the pieces so you can see in pieces. And you get creative skyline and so on. Next, the difference between in public domain terms between day, night, the fact that now we have objects which are like a whole new game about buildings and that, really like markets. Next, last is Tokyo 4, a competition which we made in 2012. Which was for I think it was a wonderful competition for 10,000 people who need to have conferences and so on. In the centre of Tokyo, in this highly dense city in the world, and what we suggest is that rather than put these conference or great halls as Southern London land on the ground, we would give the whole ground area public domain use over here, simply changing and so on. And above it, well, we would create great sort of floating ships in the air. The great sustained steel boat cars, ship cars, linked back escalator to those rebellion ships. Great ships, so there would be a sky-related part of that building, and then a sort of more like reforming down the public space down below, connected with glass. Next. And these range of hubs, these 5,000 people each. We've been held by this sort of steel lattice system. So here you have the section point of the most, which is basically these great sort of conference halls, 5,000 people within them, picking up escalators from the exhibition areas and so on, under the low ground or into this different hall here. And you take these escalators, take a short escalator to the first floor, and long floor, and so on. And then if you want to directly do it, next. Lifetime shots staying in second of the three great conference halls suspended above the open space, so the sort of open space with an umbrella over these hulks, these ships which are suspended at the top, are held at the top by these beams, and the bottom is these bellows, so what you see is great undersizing of these things, the undersides of these conference gardens and the roof, etc. Shots of it. Next. Thank you very much. yes. But I don't think it's the. I think that there is certainly a lot of damage. I agree with a lot of damage. Especially your country, you're from Israel. Yes, your country especially.
I come from Europe.
Oh, well, I know. But there you see very clear in Israel the whole idea.
I begin to study the custom of the separation. It just was the theory of the architecture in that time, in the 60s and the last 50s in the early 60s.
Separation of activities, I agree. But
also Brasilia is.
yes, it works. Yes. Oh, yeah. Though
There was
the only thing I'll say, and I first of all, I agree with much of what they said, but it is nearly impossible within a society which is market-driven, financially driven, to create a market space. Who pays for education? Except if you have a government, or some form of taxation system, or some form of language system, which is based on government control, then obviously if you have an open space, no developer is going to say, you're going to give it away, not give them in today's society. He's going to put a building out. I don't think he may put a little piazza in front, but basically he will put it. And so, no, I accept that point. And I start by saying I accept that the separation of activities, the like to say, was a lot of the planning pieces that was put forward were mistakes. Probably the biggest mistake was how long it took us to react. It took us, and also we were very slow. We were unfortunately slow. Disciplines, and we didn't learn quickly enough some of the mistakes. But the point I'm making is that isn't a problem today. The problem that exists in the West today is very much that there's no longer, especially in England, there's no longer a balance between public and private. Which I don't think is in the architect's hands. I think it's now in the hands of the bankers. And the thesis I would put forward is that the whole idea of government is to balance government and the people, the balance between the citizens, which is the people, and business. That's government's role. That's its primary role, is to find out the balance between those two. Especially in highly efficient market society, efficient. Also, it's highly efficient in destroying the world, but that's another. That psychologically is inefficient, but in the sense of business, it's highly efficient. To making money, and somehow we can recreate a balance between public and private, between money, pure money, and enjoyment, if you like.
Yeah, you just touched on some issues that are very interesting. I think you make very good buildings, but understand that a lot of people are taking very different interest in what you're up to at the moment because of this thing of plugging into a Labour Party. And a lot of people, been working away often for years at the Labour Party branches and the unions and the local struggles to try and influence. And I'd be really interested to know what you're saying to these people. It seems like they're going to listen to you. And so on. And there's a sort of nervousness that on what you're talking about, I think to us as architects are very key issues, and often in the realm of canispec, if I could use a word which sounds a bit pejorative. But I think it's important that they are nevertheless however important to us almost secondary issues. And I think often that they, ask a question, do you think they often cloud what are more primary issues to many people, issues about controls of capital, controls of resources of land and buildings. And
I wrote a little
to talk about those things to Mark Fisher and
here again, first of all, this talk touches on that jobs that cities that are doesn't really look at the political, and I did write a book which was for modern view, where I discuss more of the sort of political economic pressures. I am not optimistic in terms of the question which you're asking. I'm not optimistic. I mean, long term I'm optimistic because I think the pressure is such that the crisis is so large that what is interesting is no longer a problem of the left only. It's actually, it's the time, the Sunday Times that publishes this number is for you. Along the bicycle. The manifest. And so on. I mean, so what I'm trying to say is suddenly we begin to see actually a spectrum which is much more important, from right to left or left to right. It's viewed differently, but there is a general. And I think that there is the beginning of a feeling that the environment is probably the most single important thing to put on any political agenda. And ideally the global environment, which we're nowhere near, but apart from ourselves or people like ourselves, politically, nobody is. But there is beginning to be a consciousness about the global environment that if we don't do something about the global environment, there ain't going to be an environment to discuss in 50 years or 100 years' time. Certainly whether it's the Greens in Germany or whether it's the sort of I can call it the left in France, or whatever it is, there are people who are all beginning to argue about it and talk about it, and it is beginning to sort of come up on the agenda. And the whole idea of a human city and so on. And I think that there is a hope. Just to go historically back for one moment, London was, and not the globe this time, but London was probably the greatest slum in the world, in the Western world in the 19th century, because it was an industrialized city. And it was really because of such a great time, because people were worried, because the government was worried about uprising. That's really why London changed. People were suddenly worried. It's sort of 68, if you like, but the 68 that worked. 68 didn't really work, in the sense that we didn't see enough of the continuity of reaction. But certainly by late 1990s, 1890s, there was such a reaction. People started to clean up the slums, to put sewers in, to get light into buildings, to create squares, parks, and gardens. I think that there's a possibility we're getting closer to that point. That there is a realization that we can't go on the way that we're doing, that we can't let the ozone layer be completely destroyed by individual needs. And again, I come back to this strange figure, for instance, on vehicles. I know I have a part of my battle, if you like. But it is intriguing that, in fact, even in London, central London has only 20% of people use private cars. So the changes in that map, the majority, 80%, go by public transport. So we're not talking about something that everybody uses. We're talking about something that 80% of people don't use, if you like, which is vehicles. So you could start to look at, once upon a time we all say it has to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. Couldn't you, couldn't you use trams? Could you not limit the cars to where they can go without doing whatever these vehicles are? So people are beginning to ask those questions. People are beginning to say, as I said in Berlin, they're beginning to say only 10% of people can use cars. There just won't be bloody spaces for us. And so on. So there are beginning to, just like the sewage system, where people used to say, well, it's, well, I'm not going to give up my land to have a sewer through. People are beginning to say, now people accept that you have to have sewer, you have to have street lighting, whatever it may be. People are now beginning to say, well, you actually can't have the corrosion of the environment as much of the technology today. And we can't have factories dumping their mess into the rivers or the sky. It's a recognition of the problem. So at that level, I am optimistic. At the level of whether we're going to see a sudden change here, no, I'm not optimistic. I have to admit that though I'm an old plan socialist, I probably would have done exactly the same for the right if I'd been asked for it, in the sense that my interest in getting it done. It just is more likely to be done, even now, by Labour, but only just by a fraction, I'd say. I'm sorry to be honest. Even that, I think it's organisation. I mean, the organisation is the first. I mean, it's organisation in the sense of education, in the sense of, there are massive areas of the world which are not occupied. And also, most of the Western world are arriving at zero. Not, I agree, not the Oriental or Central and South American and so on. But, and I think it is, again, I agree, it's a critical problem, but it's not the most critical problem, in my opinion. It's not that, it's actually the lack of political organization. Yeah. because it is hard to do with it. It's partly to do with planting ways. I mean, again, your country has shown, all countries in the world have shown that you can make a desert into an orchard, if you like. So if we accept that as a policy, then you could actually have many more people. If you control all the other secondary and tertiary problems, including the political problems.
But what, I mean, presumably then countries are feeling rather out of control of multinationals and banks. I mean, we had a very powerful and pessimistic presentation by Paul Finch during his Economist Conference.
Actually,
Who mentioned that? Yeah, who mentioned that the combined debt of loans to banks in London at the moment is £40 billion, which is 5 times the government borrowing requirement
but down the line,
which is fast, massive.
20% of all office building are not occupied because it's how much? 65, whatever the hell the figure is. Whatever it is, completely, and yet, the huts and shelter problem is, so there's no match, there's no, sure, we have the means, in my opinion, the means are kind of in here. We have the means to solve these problems, sort of like a cooler thing. In a way, and it's just the fact that we don't want to apply it because we are not trained, educated, or actually educated, to actually give them the importance of it. That's given sufficient importance. And then the result is, every time we call back saying, oh, boom, we have whatever it is, half office building is not empty. And meanwhile, as I kind of even this late 6:30 coming up Charing Cross, I counted the number of people sitting in doorways, 6:30, and so on, sort of making their homes or building up their cardboard cities and so on. And this is obviously a mismatch of between the possibility and what actually happens in reality.
I was just wondering, your plans actually for the development camps and linking the squares in London, they mainly focusing on the west end part of London.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at what struck me in London is that if you look at the east or the city side, there's nobody living in the city, right? It's totally dead, what I've seen in the weekend. And I wonder whether you had any ideas about how to make that more livable, how to get people back in that
There's
part.
probably two ways of looking at it, and but certainly working as we are in Berlin has some of the central part of Berlin has the same slight crisis, that is that the landowners are quite interested in offices with some shopping. I'm not interested in apartments really. Whereas actually one of the things about Berlin is a tradition of apartments over shops. I mean, it's one of the nice things to see. I mean, the streets is actually super good. And yes, exactly. So like many continental, yes, many continental cities, where you have this mix where you sort of people shop and people are obviously looking down and shopping. And you can see that there's not enough money in it. That is the argument for not doing it. But then again, there are all sorts of systems of control and encouragement and so on. You can give sort of inverted common planning gain advantages. You can say to people, you can build offices of, as long as you 10% of all your office space or 50 or whatever percentage is shelter or housing and so on. You can tax, as places like San Francisco have, you can tax places. You can say for every $100 you spend on offices, you will spend $10 on, $6 of those dollars will go, actually $17 in San Francisco, but $6 will go to housing. So now whether that's on the same site or the next door site. But there are all sorts of control systems. We live in a society which is full of control, so we might want to use this and look at them long term, including, is it logical to have large areas of the city which are empty for 18 hours, number of hours, of the day. It isn't logical, really. It's illogical to have to do it. But you're not going to do it purely by allowing market forces to dictate. Market forces purely work on a year-by-year basis. Profit at the end of each year, profit and profit. Buildings that, after a year or so ago, I spoke half my buildings with developers. I mean, they would look for a return in 10 years. There's no bush, let alone a tree that would grow in 10 years. So if you're looking at a 10-year return, forget landscape, forget greenery, forget housing. All they're going to do is a cardboard form, practically, which has this part of the world, its offices. It could be something else somewhere else. But architecture and environment is about a much longer term view of society than 10 years. So one of the problems is one of the real problems that we have is the accounting system. Not actually the critical thing today. It's no longer the Athens route, but it's actually the accounting system. To me, is the real, well, it's accounting that gives form to the strange system. Time to have a drink somewhere else. Thank you.